my shell. Don't waste your hammer on a broken bell. Broken bell, a broken bell. Don't waste your hammer on a broken bell. Shadows rise when you hear the call. Shine the light and you watch them fall. Watch them fall with the coming day. Shine the light and they fade away. Well, I let you in, see inside. You will never change my mind. You will never change my mind. Cut your lies with a rusty tongue. Build your house with the deed you've done. The deed you done got a ringing sound. The deed you done gonna tear you down. Well, I let you in, see inside. You will never change my mind. You will never change my mind. Copper and tin for a shiny skin. Shiny skin, shimmering new. Copper and tin, ringing true. Tolling laws crack my shell. Don't waste your hammer on a broken bell. Broken bell, a broken bell. Don't waste your hammer on a broken bell. Well, I let you in, see inside. But you will never change my mind. Never change my mind. You will never change my mind. Never change my mind. Tall grass whispers
of you who don't know what a regular science pub looks like, we're going to begin with a Q&A we're going to begin with trivia. Oops. Okay. Maybe you can hear me, maybe you can't hear me. But we're going to start with trivia. And for trivia, grab a pen and paper so you can participate. After that, we'll have a lecture by Dr. Nelson, and then we'll end with a Q&A session. For the Q&A, you can submit your questions at any point during the lecture. You can submit questions during any point in the lecture via the comments in our live feed. We'll collect all of your questions, and then after the lecture, I'll ask Dr. Nelson whatever you want me to ask him. If you enjoyed tonight's lecture, please consider making a donation to help support OMSI. You can use the donate button on our Facebook page, or you can visit omsi.edu/donate. But don't worry, there's no pressure to donate. Our mission at OMSI is to inspire curiosity by creating engaging science learning experiences for people of all ages and backgrounds. So please sit back, relax, and get ready for a great lecture right after our trivia. So tonight, I want to welcome one of our amazing OMSI educators to play along live with y'all at home. So please give a warm welcome to Jennifer Powers, who's the assistant manager of OMSI's Featured Hall. Woo!
Thanks, Rebecca.
Hey, Jen, how's it going?
Great. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Are you ready for trivia?
I am so ready for trivia. I'm very excited.
You have some kind of like living things science background, don't you?
I do. My background is in botany, but I don't want that to skew the possibility of me knowing the answers to these questions, because it's possible that will help, or it's possible that these are completely new things, in which case I get to learn, and that's very exciting also.
Oof, yeah, hopefully we don't know all of science yet.
I do not know all of science, that is for sure. A lot of learning to do.
Awesome. So if you are ready, you've got your letters, you've got your true falses.
Got my true falses, I got my letters, I'm ready to go.
Nice.
Okay.
For everyone at home, if you are doing this, it's okay if you didn't draw out letters beforehand. We totally accept that because you're not on video. But hopefully, if you're playing with other people, you can make some stakes, play for who takes out the trash, or who has to yell at their barking dogs, who has to make it interesting at home. So create some stakes, maybe just bragging rights. The prize of many claps is still my favorite prize. So that's probably what I'll be bestowing upon Jen once she wins this trivia.
And bestowing upon my dogs a calmness to allow me to do trivia.
Jen's going to phone a friend at some point, and that friend is going to be a dog. I'm really excited.
Yep.
There's 10 multiple choice questions. I'm going to read out the question. I'll give you time to guess, and then I'll reveal the answer to each question before I move on to the next one.
Got it.
Are you ready?
I am. Ready.
Pretty sure I've asked you that like 5 times. So,
no, but I wasn't ready before, and now I'm ready. So yes, I was lying before. We're ready now.
We're all okay. Awesome. Question the first.
Okay.
The H.J. Andrews Experimental Forest was established in 1948, but what year did the Andrews Forest become a National Science Foundation Long Term Ecological Research Site? So, 1949, like right after the forest was established. Mm-hmm. Was it in 1908, way before the forest was established? Okay. 1980 or 2008?
Because I can, gonna go with C. 1980 seems like a good year to do that.
Yeah, that's, science was happening in 1980, wasn't it?
I hope it was happening in all those years, but yeah, particularly in 1980. Yes!
You're right!
Yay!
Yeah, it became a long-term ecological research site in 1980, 4 years before my glorious birth. So
It
I
do.
overshadowed it a little bit. What was the original name
Oh
of the?
no.
Was it the Blue River Experimental Forest, the Franklin D. Roosevelt Experimental Forest, the Rainbow Bridge Experimental Forest, or the Mackenzie River Experimental Forest?
And this was its original name in the 40s.
I would guess when it was established.
Ooh. I don't know. D, the river, one of the rivers, but I can't decide which river.
It's one of the rivers.
Oh man. A. I knew it was a river. It had to be.
It was the Blue River Experimental Forest.
Oh, you're so good at giving hints. I totally got that right.
Yeah, we're all winners here. The winners of knowledge. Okay. Next question. Ooh, this one involves pictures of cute
Yes.
things. What mammal species is not present in the Andrews Forest? A black bear, a red fox, a dusky shrew, or a gray wolf?
I mean, I love all of those things, so I'd like them all to be part of the forest, but I guess maybe the wolf is not part of that forest at present.
Yeah, man, wolves get a bad rap sometimes. Look at how cute that wolf is.
Oh, so cute.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. Hopefully someday that wolf will be back.
One day.
One day.
I wonder if we'll hear more about that. I feel like wolves will feature at some point in this presentation.
Yeah. Maybe some moose too. My favorites.
Okay. One of the research projects in the Andrews Forest is called the Log Decomposition Study.
Okay.
The leader of this project estimated that how many years did they estimate the study would take to complete? 50, 200, 750, or 1,200 years?
All the years.
To complete a log decomposition study.
Yep. All the years.
I will say it's not like we're not like building soil here. It's just like the log is decomposing. I don't know.
200 years. You're not.
You have 100% correct, Jen.
You're right. You're right. I do. I'm doing so well.
I'm so proud
so
of you.
200 years for the log to decompose?
I mean, that's what I'm guessing because it's a log decomposition study, right? Maybe
all right. That's a long time. I was kind of thinking it'd take longer.
I would love to be a scientist and like write that initial proposition. Like, here's my study. Don't worry, it'll only take 200 years.
It'll only take 200 years. Here are the people I'm handing it down to.
It's like job security, at least.
Right? Yeah. For the next 200 years, I need to fulfill this grant project.
Here's your true false question.
Okay, I'm ready.
Was the Andrews Forest and the science within it featured in a Pulitzer Prize finalist and a Pulitzer Prize winning book?
I mean, yes. It must have been.
This would be kind of a bummer of a question.
It would be a huge bummer. I actually just got the Overstory as an audio book, and I'm really looking forward to reading it.
It's so good. It's so good. Yeah.
Jeez.
The Andrews Forest is pretty great too. So the Andrews Forest figures significantly in two books that gained Pulitzer Prize praise in 2019. The Richard Powers' 502-page book called The Overstory is a winner in the fiction category, and then Rush's Rising Dispatches from a New American Shore concerning sea level rise in the time of global general fiction. So,
nice.
Books. That was a lot of words. Okay.
Yeah, a lot of words.
You're still 5 out of 5. So you're doing so much better than I did when I was a trivia guest. So.
Thanks. All because of you, though. All because of you.
All because of your great brain and your problem-solving abilities and you got a lot going on. Processing skills.
I have a lot of those, yeah.
So the Andrews Forest is a single watershed, which is called the Lookout Creek Watershed. What body of water does it empty into? You can just hold up a letter if you need to there. I think you might have a dog happening. So does Lookout Creek watershed empty into the Roosevelt Reservoir,
Okay.
the River Reservoir, Lake Mackenzie, or the Kalapa Inland Sea?
Well, it was the Blue River answer last time. So if they originally named the forest after it, I'm going to assume that that's close.
Look at those processing and deduction skills.
Yes, because I got the right.
This
Because I
is-
got it wrong the last time. I got this one right. Learn.
Yeah, this is how scientists work. They learn, they gather new information, they use that to modify their like actions further on. Yeah, you're just modeling for us right now.
So on
The
mission.
Blue River Reservoir. That looks beautiful. I would go there.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Number 7. I have faith that you're going to get this one too.
Okay.
I actually have faith you'll get all of them. So I guess that wasn't too meaningful for me to say. Okay. The Andrews LTER program is led by a quote lead PI.
Mm-hmm.
World does PI stand for? Primary instigator, principal initiator, principal investigator, or perfunctory ingester?
I know this one, although I wish it was the primary instigator. It is the principal investigator. Woo.
See,
I hope
I really
so.
wanted that to be D.
Unless all of my science knowledge has failed me.
I aspire to one day be a perfunctory ingester.
Oh, me too.
Okay.
I have a couple of primary instigators fighting on my couch right now, in case you can't tell what's happening in the background.
Excellent. Okay, I lost my mouse. There we go. Okay. Number 8.
Whoa.
Which well-known musical artist has been an artist in residence at the Andrews Forest? Dang, forests have artists in residence? The world is an amazing place.
Yeah,
Okay.
it is.
Brian May from Queen.
Okay.
Miller, aka DJ Spooky.
Uh-huh.
Gaga, but before she was famous and just went by Lady Ga. Or Kurt Cobain from Nirvana.
Oh, no. I don't know. I want all of them to have been forest artists in residence. I don't know. Is this back in the 80s also? Okay, I'm gonna go with Kurt Cobain just because I know he's from the area. No? DJ
He doesn't
Spooky
seem like the
because
artist in residence type. He's a little like anti-establishment for that.
That's fair, but I bet he loves trees. Okay.
No, you're right. Sorry.
I was right. I was gonna keep guessing.
I was giggling at the dogs. Yeah, Paul Miller, aka DJ Spooky, is
great
an
name.
artist in residence at
DJ
Andrews Forest.
Spooky. I should have guessed that first.
That's the best job. I think that would be the best job. Just as an FYI, my dog heard your dogs and has come over here also.
Oh.
So.
Sorry, the primary instigators are instigating in other ways.
Okay, almost through it. What well-known forest ecologist was one of the original leaders of the Andrews Forest LTER program?
Okay.
Jerry Franklin, Frederick Clements, Janet Franklin, or Nell Noddings? I honestly can't help you with this one. I don't remember.
Yeah. I would love it to be a lady scientist. So I'm going to go with Janet.
Yeah, I support that. No.
Yeah. That's okay. I bet Jerry's cool too. He's got a cool hat.
He seems cool.
Yeah.
It's a nice, like lavender shirt.
Yeah. Matches the sky. It's good coordination.
Okay, final question.
Okay.
Did you know there's a children's book featuring the Andrews Forest?
I had no idea, but I'm ready to guess what it's called.
That was the whole question. Yeah. No,
Okay.
did you know? No.
No, false.
What was this book called? Crying from the Wild, Ellie's Log. Oh my goodness, yuck, that's disgusting. It tastes like a fried newt. Or The Heart of the Forest.
Okay. Would like it to be C.
Remember what kind of studies that they do here?
Yeah, I was just going to say, judging by the decomposition log question that I got wildly wrong earlier, I'm going to guess it's about decomposing logs, and I bet it was Ellie's log.
Ellie's log.
Yay! Look at that.
I think 9 out of 10 questions.
Thank you.
You're an amazing scientist, Jen. How do you feel?
I feel really good. I also feel great that my dogs have now decided to stop fighting when I'm done with trivia.
Well, they were trying to help you answer the question. You just couldn't understand their love language.
Got it. Got it. You're right. You're right. No, that was great. I feel like I learned some things, and I'm excited to learn more.
What's your favorite fact? What's your favorite fact from the trivia?
I think I'm going to remember the log one for a long time. 200 years. Decomposing log. I love it.
That's super cool. Well, thank you so much for joining, Jen.
Of course.
I always appreciate you on our trivia.
Thanks.
I'll see you later.
You will see me later. Bye.
Bye. So I hope everybody did amazingly on their trivia, and that you now have your little brother to take the trash out for you for the next few weeks. And so now it is time for our lecture. I would like to introduce Michael Paul Nelson. He is the Ruth H. Spaniol Chair of Renewable Resources and is also the lead principal investigator for the, whoops, I lost my screen, for the H.J. Andrews Experimental Forest. He is also a senior fellow at the Spring Creek Project for Ideas, Nature, and the Written Word. And here's a delightful quote. Michael is different from most philosophers. He's funny, irreverent, and worried about the world, and especially about wolves, says Kathleen Dean Moore from Great Tide Rising Towards Clarity and Moral Courage in Time of Planetary Change. So welcome, Dr. Nelson. I'm super excited for your talk, and you can take it away. Are you ready? Uh-oh, you might be a little bit further.
Right, thank you very much. I'm all set. Thanks for the invitation. I really appreciate the work that OMSI to share some of this work with you, and thanks to all of you who are listening for sharing your evening in this way. So, I want to jump right into it. What I really want to do is I want to share a place in Oregon and some work that's done. So this is a place that some of you may have lived and some of you may have not. You've just learned a little bit about it, of course, through the trivia. The historian Bill Robbins once referred to the Andrews Forest as Oregon's hidden gem. I mean, I like the fact that it's in Oregon, and I like the fact that he thinks it's a gem. I'm really not happy about the fact that it's hidden. And so one of the things that I want to do in this science pub is sort of unveil some of the work that's being done there. I don't think it's fair that the work is hidden. But before I do that, I want to tell you a little bit about the work that I did before I came here. So I arrived here in 2012, and I had experience working on a long-term ecological research project. Similar to the one that took place at the Andrews Forest. And so I, for years, which Isle Royale, for those of you, the largest island in Lake Superior, it's about 45 miles long, and it's about 9 to 20 miles off the shore, nearest city, if you know that part of the world. And Isle Royale is home to a population of moose that arrived right after 1900, years later. So it's as close to a single predator and a single prey system as we get. And they're on an island, which means it's as close to an experiment as we get in ecology. And when I started working on this project, I knew about ecology really was equation. But I didn't really know it as this equation, because and that's math, and those things don't often mix very well. And this is what what's called the Locke-Volterra predator-prey relationship. And it's a really simple idea that as a prey base increases in abundance, that predators are allowed to increase as well because there's more for them to eat. Numbers go down and predator numbers model in nature is this kind of smooth relationship between predator and prey over time, this sort of cyclical relationship here. One of the very first things that I learned about is the main data set, the collection of 2 points every winter, relationships sort of play out over now more than 60 years. And of course, what you see is not anything that really looks like a predator, the Locke-Volterra relationship. You probably squint and little pieces of Locke-Volterra, here and there in this image. But this is an example of a surprise, and this is what I want.
Hey, Michael.
Yeah.
Your internet's breaking up a little bit. Maybe if you turned off your video, it might be a little smoother.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
Stop video. How's that?
We'll see if it works. So
we'll see. Okay.
Okay. Feel free to go a little bit slow too, because the audio is kind of breaking up.
Okay, we'll do. All right, so just to review quickly, the real data set from Isle Royale doesn't really look anything like the Locke-Volterra relationship that we assume. So this is an example of where a theory that we have about how predator-prey relationships work doesn't actually, we're surprised when we experience them in these relationships in the real world. Other surprise that I encountered on Isle Royale was trying to get my head around. This is really just an attempt to answer it. And this, of course, is a really wolves coming. Am I back?
Hey, Michael, I think we lost your slides, but
Okay.
Your audio is really rough. We can't hear anything.
Okay. I don't know why that is. Okay. Let's see. Do you have my slides now?
Not yet.
Okay. Share screen. Share.
Okay. Your slides are there. You got to full screen it. I'm not sure when your internet connection's so much. You might want to try exiting Zoom and reconnecting.
No.
Thank you to everybody who's persevering with us watching. We are working on some connection issues. We're going to talk more about wolves and moose. Yeah, we're having an experiment right now. We're being scientists. We're going to solve some problems very scientifically with the wonders of technology. So while we wait for Dr. Nelson, are you there, Doctor? I think he's disconnecting and reconnecting. So while we wait, we can talk about moose and wolves. And I don't have any fun facts about any of this stuff, actually. Let's see. Wolves. Yeah, I don't have anything to say. But we're going to be back as soon as we can. So thanks for your patience, and please hold tight. This is a great time to donate. Thank you to whoever is helping me out in the chat there. Yeah, while you wait, you can click on that donate button for OMSI. We love donations, and we're working hard. Fun fact, we're going to hopefully be opening the museum on June 20th, just of our Body Worlds exhibit. So if you want to have a nice, safe experience, it's no touch, and see the magic of Body Worlds, which a bunch of plasticized specimens. You can learn a lot about biology and anatomy. So yeah, there's fun things to do in the future if you want to not be on Zoom your whole life, because things like this tend to happen with Zoom. Other fun things are Stay Home, Stay Curious website at OMSI is full of really great experiments that include pollinator observations and forest observations. And there's a will it sink or will it float experiment that's super fun. You can explore density and weight. There's also other stuff. Let's see. I feel like I'm not built for this. Improving on the internet. This is great, though. I'm having a great time. I hope everybody else is having a great time. Maybe we can switch to some of the pre-show trivia slides while we wait for Dr. Nelson to come back. Is that maybe possible, Jason? I will say also, if you're looking for OMSI-ish things to do this summer, we are running our summer science day camps at the museum, also very safe. I think you can still register. There are week-long day camps for kids from pre-K up through 8th grade. If you have high schoolers, their option, they can learn with me because I am the person who hangs out with high schoolers. And yeah, so sign up for OMSI Summer Science Day Camps if you want to do science this summer. Come check out Body Worlds.
tall grass whispers, the hills when the wind blows. You stand dreaming deep in the willows. Two boys
Thanks,
tumbling.
everybody. Dr. Nelson pointed out that this is a brilliant demonstration of the ecology of surprise. We're doing some science here. We're experimenting. I really appreciate everyone who's waited through. So we should be better. And I want to pass it off to Dr. Nelson. So good to see you again, and take it away.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn my video off just to make sure I get it. Sorry about that. I got new internet, and this is the first time we've had an issue with it. Okay, so to start over quickly, I'll get to where I was. I want to share a little bit about the work that's done at the Andrews Forest. And this is a place in Oregon. This is a place that the historian Bill Robbins, he has a book coming out in 2020 called A Place for Inquiry, A Place for Wonder, which is a history of the Andrews Forest. But he refers to the Andrews Forest as Oregon's hidden gem. And while I like the fact that the Andrews Forest is in Oregon, and while I like the fact that it's a gem, I'm not really excited about the fact that it's hidden. And so what I want to really do is reveal a little bit about the place, and a little bit about the science, and a little bit even beyond the science, I think, what goes on at the Andrews Forest. So just a kind of quick background to illustrate what it is that I mean by the ecology of surprise. One of the things that we see in long-term ecological research is it's just the persistence of surprise. We think things work one way, and it turns out they don't work that way, or they work some other way, or they do work that way, but it's not for the reason that we thought. And I first was exposed to this way of thinking before I came to Oregon in 2012 by working on the longest predator-prey study in the history of the world, the Isle Royale Wolf Moose Project. And immediately when I started working on that project in the early 2000s, there were a couple of surprises that I encountered that I will illustrate what I mean by the ecology of surprise. So for those of you who don't know, Isle Royale is the biggest island in Lake Superior. It's 210 square miles. It sits just off of the mainland where Minnesota and Canada meet by about Thunder Bay, Ontario, is where you'll be able to see the island from the mainland. And the island is populated by a single prey species, moose, Elsis elsis, and Canis lupus, a single predator species, the gray wolf. And so you have this system where you basically have a single predator and a single prey on, a remote, sequestered island. This is as close to an experimental design as we typically get in field ecology. When I started working on this project, the only thing that I really knew about ecology was this equation. But I'm a philosopher, and math and philosophy don't always mix very well, so I didn't really know it as this equation. What I knew it as was this image. And this is the idea that you have this sort of cyclical relationship between predator and prey, that as prey bases increase, that allows for predator abundance to increase. And then if external circumstances or predator impact affect that prey base, they decline and predators decline in turn, and that what you see over time is just this playing out of this basic relationship over and over. So that's the theory. But if you look at the actual data from Isle Royale, the data set of wolves and moose over time, that is not what you see. You might see, if you squint here or there, you might see little pieces of predator-prey relationship within this long-term data set. But by and large, it does not follow that model. So this is a surprise that we have a theory that says one thing, and then when we observe the actual world, we see something quite different. The other surprise that I'll share with you from Isle Royale is the answer to what seems like a really simple question, and that is, how much do wolves actually eat? Can we actually measure how much they eat? Can we measure how many moose they kill rates or predation rates? And of course, as wolves come back into the world, that's one of the things that we're interested in, is how much impact are they going to have on on ungulates, things that we like to eat. So you can measure this in a variety of ways. What I'm going to show you is this measured as kilograms of food per wolf per day over time. So we started paying attention to kill rate in the early 1970s. And if you just take the first few years of kill rate and you map it on this histogram of kilograms of food per wolf per day, and every blue box is a single pack, this is what you get. So you get a little bit of a spread, right? There's a little bit of a range. Packs are varying in how much they are actually impacting their prey base. But the range is fairly narrow. So you would answer this question in a certain way. Well, what would happen if you kept paying attention to this system over time? So if you go to 1975 and you keep paying attention, you get a bigger range of responses. If you go to 1980, you get a bigger range of responses, and you get what seems like a little bit of piling in the middle. 1985, even a broader range of responses. Now, what you might be wondering is, what does this all actually mean? So the middle red line is the minimum that wolves need to continue to exist. This is what you have to have as a wolf to live. The line on the right is twice that amount, and the line on the left is half that amount. So this is, I think, hard to wrap your mind around, that some wolves, some packs, at certain times are getting less than half of what they need to continue to exist, and some are getting more than twice what they need to continue to exist. So what seems like an answer to a simple question, how much do wolves eat? Your response, if you look at this, is it's not easy to answer that question. Well, what happens if you keep paying attention over time? And I'll take you to 2010. So this, becomes almost a kind of, you start to wonder if you are even asking the right question to begin with. So this is one of the interesting features about long-term ecological research, that, when asked even a simple question, our range in confidence actually seems to decrease significantly over time, which means something kind of interesting, that observations that are made over shorter periods of time might be more precise, right? Our early answer might be more precise, but we would say, if we're thinking about the long term, that that's not a very accurate response. And if you make an observation over a longer period of time, you might have a more accurate response, but a less precise response. So, okay, that's Isle Royal. That's the Upper Great Lakes area, but we're primarily interested in Oregon and the Cascades and the Andrews Forest. So I'd like to start by introducing you to the Andrews Forest with a short video.
Without this place, we wouldn't know how important Pacific Northwest rainforests are in capturing and storing water. Or how well these forests capture carbon and produce oxygen. Or what a 500-year-old tree is as wildlife habitat. We wouldn't know how much life is created when these big old trees finally fall. And what the forest floor does for the quality of our air and water. Or what those trees do to shape rivers and provide habitat for the life within them. The questions that are asked here are parts of that big question. How does our world work? This is the H.J. Andrews Experimental Forest. This is a place of long-term inquiry. It's a community of people who are working to understand the ecosystems that run our planet and our own role in those ecosystems.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that. For those of you who don't know, this is the location of the Andrews Forest, right? So we're in the Cascades, and you can kind of see where we're located there. You can see what it looks like. The Andrews Forest is a single watershed. This part of the world, we like to say that our watersheds look a little bit like pork chops. So this is our pork chop. I think of it as like a heart, kind of a deformed heart maybe, on its side. And if you drive up to the Andrews Forest, this is the sign that you would see as you begin to turn into the Andrews Forest. I took the liberty of, I thought, well, maybe I could just Google map it for people. But then I realized people are in different places, but maybe a lot of you are in Portland, or you could fly into Portland. So this is where we're at. We're pretty much straight east of Eugene by about 45 or 50 miles. So if you're interested in visiting the forest, obviously you can Google map it too, but here's where it is. So one of the things, there are lots of things that are really interesting about the work that we do, but one of the things that's important to understand is that we're actually part of a really large network. The National Science Foundation funds 28 different sites that are just like ours all over the country, and you can see those sites on the map on the left there. And so that means that if you add up all of the researchers that are working at those 28 sites, it's about 2,000 people that are doing long-term ecological research at these sites. That's really an incredible number of people. And if you look at just the Andrews Forest at any given time, and this changes from time to time, but on average, there are about 100 different research projects that are actually going on at the Andrews Forest at any one time. And we're a unique program. The Long-Term Ecological Research program is unique because we're funded for 6 years at a time, and then we're funded for another 6 years and another 6 years. So every 6 years, we have to write a new grant proposal. And every grant proposal, when we're funded, we get about $1.2 million a year. And because we do the work that we do, we're able to leverage that and bring in other researchers. And so on average, when you think about those 100 research projects, it's about $4 to $7 million of research that are going on at the Andrews Forest at any given time. So those are pretty big numbers for a science that's mostly used to, working with PVC and Ziploc bags and duct tape. So we're interested in science, and science has a lot to do with numbers. So you might be interested in some of the main numbers at the Andrews Forest. You might be wondering, you have old trees. How tall is your biggest tree? Well, our biggest tree is 306 feet tall. And just for reference, if you measure the Statue of Liberty from the base to the tippy top of the Statue of Liberty, that's 305 feet. So our trees are just a tiny little bit bigger than the Statue of Liberty. The watershed that is the Andrews Forest is about 16,000 acres. Like I said, it's a single watershed. And in the past, about 25% of the forest, and I'll explain more about this in a minute, has actually been harvested, which is interesting for us because we can compare the responses of a harvested landscape and a regrown landscape to an old growth landscape, which reveals some interesting results. And about 40% of the Andrews Forest is old growth trees. So we have trees that are in the 350 age class, we have trees that are in the 500 age class, and we have individual trees here and there that are even in the 700 and 800 year old age class. So lots of critters and plants, of course. 505 different plant species can be found at the Andrews Forest. We have 9 different species of fish at the forest, and 53 different species of mammals at the forest, and 164 species of birds can be found on the Andrews Forest. So I want to give you a little bit of sense of history and where we fit into this history in Oregon when we think about forestry and forest ecology over time. And I want to start the little history lesson at about 1900. This is, you can break up history in a variety of different ways and talk about different eras. But one way to talk about that is to think about these 3 eras that are captured on the bottom of this timeline. The first era we might call the stewardship era. This is about 1900, and this is when we saw the establishment of what became the U.S. Forest Service. This was an era marked by fire suppression. That's what we did with the Forest Service, with pretty limited capacity, but that was one of the main missions. We also managed grazing allotments on national forests, but not really much more than that. There wasn't much research going on, and the Andrews Forest, of course, in this era didn't even exist. Some experimental forests were established in the 1930s, but we weren't one of those original forests. So 1948, this is when the Andrews was established by the U.S. Forest Service just after World War II, and it was established with a mandate to learn how to efficiently convert old growth into thrifty young Douglas fir plantations. That's what we were going to do at that time in the Pacific Northwest. We were going to take all of our old growth forests and we were going to turn them into young plantations. And so what we were supposed to do, what we were charged with doing is, well, how do you do that? How does that actually work? And the site, the Andrews Forest, was actually picked in part because it had a bunch of old growth. Now, there's a deep irony in that, because later the work that was done at the Andrews Forest would be pivotal in the cessation of old growth liquidation, that policy and that process. So when we decided not to do that, some of the work from the Andrews Forest became really important in that decision. Well, this stewardship era, post-World War II, gave way to what we might call the timber era. And that ended in the mid-1990s with the Judge Dwyer injunction against harvesting old growth. So the initial Forest Service research agenda, like I said, was to study the impacts of logging, on soil, on stream flow, on stream habitat. How do you efficiently build road systems? How do you reforest after a clear cut? That was the mission. In the 1970s, the National Science Foundation started a new program, a very different program, and it was called the International Biological Program. And this made possible, in many ways for the first time, highly interdisciplinary work. This brought academics, professors to team up with U.S. Forest Service scientists. This is what we say, this is when the ologists showed up. And if we think about this era, and if somebody asks, well, what did we really learn from the era of the International Biological Program? I think one of the most important things that we learned is something pretty simple but pretty profound. We learned that a forest is more than just a collection of trees. I think this is a profound shift in our thinking about what a forest is, that a forest is an incredibly complex and thoroughly connected ecosystem. And that's not necessarily what we thought a forest was prior to that. I know it's hard to believe. So from about 1980 to the present, we might call the biodiversity era. This is when we became really interested in questions of the preservation of biodiversity. The Andrews Forest became a charter member of the National Science Foundation's Long Term Ecological Research program. This is, the post-timber era to the present. This is the period of the Northwest Forest Plan that was signed in 1994. So, like I said, that's just a little bit of a timeline of where we fit into to this history of forests and forestry in the Pacific Northwest. The other thing that's really, I think, important about what we do and interesting about what we do is long-term ecological research is unbelievably rare. I think in some ways I've already convinced you just with the Isle Royale examples that, wow, it's really important. Our perceptions change if we paid attention to something for a long period of time. But even though we would argue that it's important, it's incredibly rare. We are not necessarily a culture that's very good at paying attention to things for a long period of time. A recent study, in fact, suggested that the average ecological study only lasts for about 2.5 years, which my colleagues joke is about as long as you have a single master's student. So that's how we pay attention to things. And if we think about studies that last for more than just 5 years, it's less than 2% of all of our ecological studies last for more than 5 years. So what's going on at the Andrews Forest, like what's going on in Isle Royale, is really quite precious in its rarity. The other thing that's, and I'll sort of illustrate this in more detail, a thing that's, I think, really interesting and unique about the Andrews Forest or any LTR site, it is the bringing together of a bunch of different scientists. And some of you might know the parable of the blind men and the elephant. And the parable, just briefly, is this idea that if you brought a group of blind men to an elephant and they each touched a different part of the elephant, and then you ask them, well, what is an elephant? They would describe an elephant according to their perspective, right? So we have all these different kinds of scientists that are sort of touching different parts of our system and describing it differently. And our job is to think about, how do we bring those people together in some way to get a whole picture of the elephant or the forest collectively. And I would say that our site is even weirder than this, because at the Andrews Forest, we actually include non-scientists. We include writers and artists and musicians and historians and even philosophers in our attempt to understand what the forest is and what's going on in the forest. So we're really talking about talking across disciplines. So that creates its own wonderful and unique challenges. The other thing about the Andrews Forest, when you think about a forest, especially a forest that's as big as ours and as high as ours, there's lots of different places where we could be studying the forest. And we're studying all of those places. So we have people who are studying what's going on up in the canopy. This is a picture of Sky Lawn, maybe 60 meters high in a canopy of a tree. We're studying what goes on all the way up and down the canopy, what we call the vertical gradient of the tree. So if you look at that picture, you can see there are red and blue, they look like wires going up and down the tree. So we're measuring things like temperature and relative humidity up and down the vertical gradient of a tree. Of course, it's easy to get to the ground, so we're of course on the ground. And we're studying the trees, the death, lives and deaths of trees, and all the various animals that exist in the forest. But we're also in the streams. We have a lot of streams in the Andrews Forest. So you have lots of people who are doing lots of work on streams and fish. And of course, so much of what is important in a forest like this actually goes on underneath the ground in places that we can't see or we can't readily access. So we have a lot of people who are doing work on soils and soil moisture. And some critters, it seems, they defy location. So we're studying them too. We're studying the various animals like birds that occupy many parts of the forest. And yes, this is a picture of a spotted owl, and the Andrews Forest is one of the places where early spotted owl work was done and continues to be done. But that's not all we do. Of course, we have all of these different scientists, but like I said, we also have other kinds of people, other kinds of inquirers or researchers that come to the forest. We have writers and artists and humanists that come to the forest. And one of the things that I think we're trying to do at the forest is, I think in some ways, maybe without knowing this, we're trying to fulfill a prophecy from 1935. Although Leopold, the famous conservation philosopher and scientist, once lamented modern ecology. He said that one of the anomalies of modern ecology is that it's the creation of two groups, each of which seems barely aware of the existence of each other. The one studies the human community almost as if it were a separate entity and calls its findings sociology, economics, and history. The other studies the plant and animal community and comfortably relegates the hodgepodge of politics to the liberal arts. And this is very common in academia, that we separate our disciplines. But Leopold thought that it was really the inevitable fusion of these two lines of thought that would constitute the outstanding advance of, well, what he thought was the present century. What we're hoping for is it's our present century, perhaps. So I think in some ways that's what we're trying to do at the forest. Like I said, we have lots of different artists and writers coming to the forest. We've had over 100 writers in residence at the forest that have produced just amazing stuff. Some of the country's best nature writers have been in residence at the forest. We have lots of artists who are spending time at the forest, photographers and painters. We already know that we have music at the forest. DJ Spooky did a number of visits to the forest and created a forest symphony, and he toured Oregon with a forest symphony. And of course, we have a really vibrant education program. The little picture on the right there is kids who have climbed up into trees and are hanging out on platforms in trees. But we also have a history project going on, trying to understand this history. We've been around long enough where we're of interest to historians. And we have the work that I do, which is called conservation ethics, and I'll touch on that a little bit more in a minute. So it's a many-disciplined place, as you can see. We're not unique in that. A number of the LTR sites around the country, I mentioned there are 28 different sites, and a number of them actually have pretty vibrant arts and humanities programs. So Harvard Forest is an example of a vibrant arts and humanities program. At Bonanza Creek, outside of Fairbanks, one of their microbiologists is also a dancer and runs a program called In a Time of Change. That combines science and art in a really unique way. And North Temperate Lakes in northern Wisconsin is also a great example of an arts and humanities program. We became really interested in this a few years ago, and we surveyed all of the leaders of the network, and we wanted to know, how many of them had arts and humanities programs at their LTR sites, and what did they think of them? What did they perceive to be the value of these activities, and what were the challenges? And you can't see the little image, but one of the things that I found really interesting is if we gave them the opportunity to say that arts and humanities allows us to build relationships, to develop empathetic relationships with the natural world, and to stimulate inspiration, awe, and wonder. And we wanted to throw that in front of these people, but we weren't really sure that that's what they thought of their arts and humanities program. We mainly thought that they just saw this as a way to get the science out there. But one of the dominant answers was really, no, this is a way to build empathy and empathetic relationships with the natural world that they thought were important. So that was a really interesting finding that we're actually now following up on quite a bit. We already know from the trivia that this program has really borne lots of amazing fruit lately. Elizabeth Rush's book that features a chapter on the Andrews Forest was in the top 3 for general nonfiction in the Pulitzer Prize. And of course, the winner of the Pulitzer Prize last year was Richard Powers' The Overstory, which features the Andrews Forest. It's not called the Andrews Forest in the book, it's called the Franklin Forest, but lots of our work is featured in the book. One of our most recent arts and humanities efforts just started last week. We discovered a tree, a 350-year-old Douglas fir tree at the Andrews Forest. Through the use of some fancy sensors, we discovered that we have a tree that likes poetry. And we were able to communicate with that tree, and the tree asked if we would create a Twitter account for it to share some of its favorite poetry. So if you go to @thepoettree3 on Twitter, you can follow the poetry, and you'll see more coming out from the poetry. So now I want to talk a little bit more about the ecology of surprise, and this is to me both something that has to do with science, but to me, this is also about ethics. My background is in environmental ethics, and so I'm interested in that relationship between science and humanities, science and ethics. A dominant feature, really, of our long-term work falls under this heading of surprise. This is a forest that's, because we pay attention to it, it is a forest that is full of surprises. And interestingly, these surprises seem to come in 2 types. Type 1 are surprises or amazement about how our system works when we pay attention to it carefully and we pay attention to it over time. And type 2 surprises are where we thought something was one way, was X, and it turns out that it's actually something else. Why? Or that theory suggests one thing, and over time we see something else in the forest, kind of like that Isle Royale example. And also interesting, these surprises seem to come at different points in time. Some of them seem to come after 10 years of observation, and some of them seem to come after 40 years of observation. I'm going to just share snippets of both of these kinds, all of these kinds of surprises with you. I have little names for them that I'll share as well. The first one I'll call the legacy of human impact. So the conversion that I mentioned of old growth forests into plantations, that process produced low summer low flows of water. So in the summer, when the forest dries out, we get what we call low flows of water, the lowest point of the year for water. And that process of converting the old forest into plantations produced lower summer low flows. So water went down even further. And these lower low flows have persisted. So we see the signature of these impacts at times, and they have persisted from 25 to 45 plus years in some cases. So this is a type 2 surprise because prior work and prior theory predicted what is sometimes called hydrologic recovery. That is, the idea that the system would return to its prior state. That theory, hydrologic recovery, underpinned justifications for harvesting old forests in certain ways. And interestingly, the finding that I'm mentioning is only possible because we maintained long-term experiments that were established in the 1950s. These experiments are now more than 70 years old. Without those experiments, we wouldn't be able to say that this legacy impact persists. So the second example that I'll give is what I'll call a warming world. So the air temperature warming signal that exists underneath the old growth forest canopy is largely limited to daytime and in the summer, we've discovered. So when we measure air temperatures underneath the canopy, we seem to only be seeing a warming signal during the day and only in the summer. So this is a surprise because theory and the observations that we see in other places predicts that temperatures would warm at night and during winter. And again, we know this because we have long-term air temperature measurements in the old growth forest stands. Now, we don't quite understand the mechanism for this. We don't understand necessarily why this is happening or why the old growth forest seems to be allowing for this in some way. We just know that it is happening. Our next example, what we'll call challenging dogma. So this is the belief that larger trees grow more slowly than smaller trees. That belief that larger trees grow more slowly than smaller trees, that underpins the belief that converting older stands to younger stands increases growth. This is what we might call the decadence hypothesis, the belief that old forests are decadent. So this was used as a justification for conversion sometimes. But data from long-term measurements shows that as trees become larger, they actually go faster and faster on average. And again, we see this pattern only because we pay attention to long-term data and that we have this long-term data. So those are some 10-year surprises. What about 40-year surprises? So the first 40-year surprise I'll call response to disturbance. Fish populations increased after a major flood disturbance that we had in 1996, even though it was expected that disturbance would reduce fish populations. But at the same time, we are seeing diminishing body size of fish and salamanders over the decades. In fact, all sizes of fish and salamanders seem to be shrinking, but larger, older animals seem to be experiencing this at faster rates. So we're surprised by this because the streams are now in a condition that seems to be most favorable for fish, since a bit of warming should increase their potential growth due to faster metabolism. The next one I'll call fire regimes. So theory and practice presume that historically the dominant type of fires in the Pacific Northwest were high severity fires that replaced an entire stand. That's what we assumed. Work at the Andrews Forest seems to suggest instead that the fire regime is really a fire regime of what we call mixed severity. And it's not necessarily stand replacing, that fires actually respond to the variation that we see in our landscape. In short, there's far more complexity in this part of the Cascades than previously believed with regard to fire. This work also helps illustrate why clear cutting might not be a good emulation of natural disturbance processes, as some had suggested in the past. Governance and influence. We had the opportunity at the Andrews Forest to make a really big impact on regional forest policy during the old growth wars of the 1980s and 1990s. We had not in any way expected this. We had not set up any of our studies with this in mind, and we had certainly not expected that the policy would change so dramatically. The science that we were doing collided with changing public values, which in turn created dramatic change. Without our long-term research, and I would say even the research community that we had created, there's very little reason to think that we would have had that surprising influence on those policy changes. So I want to zoom in a little bit. We saw the log decomposition study featured in the trivia quiz, and I think that's probably just enough to pique your interest in what is this thing that you call the log decomposition study. So I want to focus on the signature program at the Andrews, our long-term decomposition study. This is the study of a large quantity of logs that were laid down in the forest in 1985. And the object of this study is to study the process of, decomposition, I guess. How does it work? What actually happens as logs decompose? Now, it was estimated at the time, 1985, that some logs would take up to 200 years to decompose. So we set this up as a 200-year study. You know enough now to know that that is an unbelievably audacious thing to do. If less than 2% of studies last for more than 5 years, to say we're going to pay attention to something for 200 years, I mean, who does that? This is, multiple investigators that have to pass this study down. So this study's been going on for 35 years. So I asked the leader of this project, Mark Harmon, what are the 3 most interesting or surprising things that we've learned from the log decomposition study? And he gave me these examples. So number one of the most surprising findings was how the presence of logs forces the forest floor, that is the organic layer of soil, to move upward. And the reason for this is actually quite simple. Mark's a forest ecologist, and so he pointed out to me that logs turn out to be solid objects. And that solidity blocks the flow of litter in the form of leaves and twigs and cones from reaching the soil surface. Nothing can reach the soil surface once a log is there. So we found over the course of 30 years that the forest floor under the log actually disappears, exposing the mineral soil surface. And so the question is, well, what does that mean? Where does it go? Well, we found it on top of the log. That means that the forest floor had migrated upward by 50 centimeters over the course of the experiment. We had not considered before that a forest floor could move, let alone levitate. So the forest floor disappears and then reforms on the top of the log, it turns out. So the second example, you all know that in science we like to quantify things. And when you do that for living versus dead trees, you come to a startling conclusion. Dead trees have more living cells than live trees. Dead trees also contain more forms of life than live trees. This raises the question, which I love because it's a philosophical question, on what it actually means to be alive in the first place. So if we tally up the living cells in a live tree, we find that while the leaves and small roots are largely alive, most of the rest of the trees, such as the outer bark, the heartwood, the sapwood, are not. As a rough estimate, a living Douglas fir is about 8 to 10% living cell mass. In contrast, a dead Douglas fir in the middle stages of decomposition is between 12 and 22% living cell mass. And if we think about life forms that exist on a live or a dead tree, it's not even close. While a live Douglas fir has potentially many species of lichens and moss living on it, and fungi growing within its roots, there are likely thousands of species in the form of fungi, bacteria, insects, and other related groups, nematodes, and protozoa using dead trees as home and food source. So this messes with our perceptions quite a bit. And finally, the third most interesting finding from the long decomposition study, or most surprising finding. So research on the rate that dead trees release carbon back into the atmosphere has found tremendous variation related to the species of the tree. So if you say, how long does it take for a tree to release its carbon, you have to talk about the species of tree, otherwise you can't really answer that question. There's huge variation between species of trees. In the Pacific Northwest, measurements indicate this release of carbon could take as little as 35 years, or as many or more than 800 years. So that means, as audacious as our 200-year study was, it actually could take 4 times as long as that to actually see the decomposition of certain kinds of trees. That number has important implications. First, because it takes decades to centuries for this carbon to be released, dead trees that are left on the ground can accumulate and store carbon in a forest in a really important sense. And second, because there's such a large degree of variation, we could vary the amount of carbon that's stored in a forest up to 20-fold just by manipulating the species that are present in that forest. So surprise, amazement, wonder. I think of these things as not only powerful scientific discoveries, but I think that the notion of surprise is what I would call normatively loaded as well. I think surprises carry value or ethical implications with them. And I think they do this in 2 different ways. First, surprise, amazement, wonder, they evoke a response in us. And that response is really simple and it's really powerful. Wow. That's how we respond to surprises. We say, wow. And wow, as simple as it is and as kind of guttural as it is, it's deeply value-laden. That's a deeply value-laden response, and it's deeply positively value-laden. And what I mean by that is we seldom go from, wow, that's amazing, to, we should destroy that. We think of the things that generate wow in us as things that are worthy of protection and worthy of our care. So that's one type of where we jump from the science to wow to, I think, of ethics. And the second is illustrated in this quotation by ecologist Dan Doak. In general, what we often see in our work at the Andrews Forest, we see theories that assume or they predict more homogeneity or regularity in time and space than is really there, or that is seen when we look at something over the long haul. And the result of that should not only be surprise, but I think it should also be a tremendous amount of humility. And humility is an ethical response. It's a virtue. It's a character trait. It's the opposite of humility, or what we call hubris, which arguably sits at the core of so many of our environmental problems. So for me, this is a great way where science can actually help us get at some of our environmental problems. So ecologists sometimes speak of a system being limited by some element or another. That, in other words, that some element like light or nutrients or temperature seems to unusually throttle a system. I think we might also say that human systems, and especially the human relationship with nature, is also marked by certain limitations. And many of my colleagues have argued that the current system is earmarked by a lack of humility, that the human-nature relationship, that is humility limited. If that's true, then the ability of long-term ecological research, like we do at the Andrews Forest, the ability of that work to contribute humility to a humility-limited system through its science, might arguably be one of its greatest contributions. And I want to share this passage with one of our writers in residence, Robin Kimmerer. She is a moss ecologist, a Potawatomi elder, and an amazing writer. If you don't know her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, you should get to know it. Robin says, our relationship with land cannot heal until we hear its stories, but who will tell them? So that's one of the ways that I think of what we do at the Andrews Forest, that we are there to tell the story of the land. I would like to end, before I end, I want to read your mind, and I know that what you're thinking right now is, oh my God, how can I get me some of that Andrews Forest? How can I stay connected to this amazing program? And here are some ways that you can do that. We have an annual open house every year, not this year, of course, but it is always the third Thursday of June. We will hopefully be back in 2021, so you can come sign up to visit the Andrews Forest at our HGA Day open house. We have a really nice website that you can visit. And there's the address there. We'll put it up at the end as well. We invite you to contact us, to get on our email list, to get on our friends list. And we're going to put an email address at the end of the presentation for you to get in touch with us. We would love to add friends to our list. And you can visit the forest. This is your forest. This is a forest that's in the National Forest, and you're welcome to come and visit the place. And I would urge you to do that. So thank you very much. And I'm going to end with a poem. This is a poem. This is a piece of a larger poem called Debris by the poet Vicki Graham, who was a poet in residence at the forest. In an old growth forest, not even the earth is still. Stakes set 4 square trace trapezoids 20 years later. A science of debris, a bit of bark, a scrap of lichen, a dropped needle or cone, a stone shifting on the gravel bar, a shed snake skin, a wasp depositing eggs near the wood boar's larva, pages torn from a book, read by a researcher. Each stake stumbled upon in the middle of the forest, each aluminum tag and magenta flag, each rope reaching up into the canopy or pipe reaching down into the creek, tells the walker, someone has measured this flow, tested this soil, weighed this log, tells the walker, someone loves this place. And we do love our place, and I really appreciate the opportunity to share some of that love with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nelson. That was amazing.
You're welcome.
Love the ending with the poem.
I can usually get through it without crying. That's why I turn my video off.
Like wipe some tears. So I have some questions for you. Are you ready?
If they're easy, I'm ready.
Okay. The first one, I'm not sure if you know this or not. Do you know what Oregon's policies are on wolf hunting and killing?
No. We're like every other state where we bounce back and forth.
Yeah.
So, I've lived in lots of places that have brought wolves back, and it's the same sort of story where, they come back for a certain period of time, then we propose hunting, and then we take it back. And I'm not really sure actually where we are in that process right now.
Okay. Next question. Are there comparative studies being done on canopy epiphyte communities in the Andrews Forest and the other LTER sites that contain old growth trees?
So I think we're the only site that actually has old growth trees. I don't think any of the other sites have. It doesn't mean they don't have epiphyte communities in their trees, but if it's really old growth comparison, I don't think we'd be able to do something like that. We might be able to do epiphyte comparisons. I mean, we could even do it within the forest, right? Because we could measure epiphytes within the harvested areas. and then the old growth and understand. And we are, that kind of effort is being led right now by a scientist named Posey Busby, who's a microbiologist. So we are starting to pay attention to epiphyte communities quite seriously.
Cool. So are there just not old growth tree? Are they less common than I think they are? If they're not at any of the
you live in a special place that still has old growth. There are lots of places talk about having old growth, but what they mean is they have like a 30-acre spot that people forgot about somewhere that eventually blows down in a storm at some point. So if you remember that map that I showed you of all the different LTR sites, we're kind of all by ourselves in that. And there are other forest sites around the country, so we can do comparisons between different forests, but they have very different histories than we do. They've been, harvested almost always in their entirety and maybe multiple times, actually.
Man, I feel pretty lucky.
You are lucky. It's easy to forget how lucky we are.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see. Do you know what type or types of logging practices were employed in the timber harvesting that happened at Andrews Forest?
We were experimenting, right? So we were at that time, the idea of conversion was largely clear cut, right? We were going to get rid of, but it was hard to do. I mean, these were enormously huge trees on incredibly steep terrain. And so how we actually do that was a tremendous question. Our job was to figure it out. Now, over time, people have proposed different kinds of harvest regimes. And we've lived through most all of those different proposals, and we have different examples of, shelter wood experiments and different kinds of experiments. So we kind of have all of them on the landscape in one way or another.
Cool. For the decomposing log study, were those logs cut by people or naturally fallen trees?
They were cut by people. We have there's a place or a couple of places. You saw that picture of Mark Harmon, and so they were brought in. So we had to hire loggers, and this is I'm sure this was the most bizarre thing they ever did in their entire lives. That they cut the trees and brought them in and laid them on the ground to rot, so some hairy scientists could look at them. I mean, I can't imagine how strange that was for them to do, but that was the process. It was really a logging exercise that resulted in, a kind of a tree graveyard where they would decompose.
That's cool. Are there any current programs in the Andrews Forest that focus solely on connecting people to place by educating the public and or working with Indigenous communities?
So we haven't worked as much as we really would like to with Indigenous communities. We have done, we have lots of efforts in education. Most of our efforts in education we bring teachers to the forest through our research experience for teachers program, and we expose them to the research. And the reason we do that is because then they go back to their schools and they impact many, many more people. But we do have field trips, especially local schools visit the forest. They engage in our Canopy Connections program, which gets the kids up into the forest. We have a fairly newly established what we call the Discovery Trail, which is where the poetry is located. And it's an interpretive trail, and we use it as a research effort. And so people can walk the Discovery Trail, and there are stops along the Discovery Trail. And the experience is an iPad experience. And I know lots of you are probably cringing that, technology. But what it allows us to do is research. I mean, because we can vary the program that somebody might experience at the forest on an iPad, and we can actually understand that. So for instance, if what we want to know is, what enhances people's appreciation of science? Is it a program where you walk around a nature trail and you're bombarded with scientific facts? Is it a program where you're bombarded with stories about science that are told by the scientists? Or is it a program where we mix science, arts, and humanities together? So how do those different kinds of treatments impact people's perceptions of the science and the value of the science and the value of the forest? So the iPads, as sinful as some of you might think, allow us, they allow us to get at questions in interesting ways. That's one of the things that happens when you start doing research, is you start to think of everything as a research opportunity. And so when we built the Discovery Trail, we thought we could do research here as well. So we do have people that are working on that. And we do have some social science efforts, some humanities and social science efforts that are going on, that have been part of the Long Term Ecological Research program for some time now. So
do you have results for what works better on the iPads, if it's stories or facts? Or
not really. I mean, our N is very small at this point, but it's very promising to think that there's reason to think that it's some mixture of science, arts, and humanities that seems to enhance people's appreciation. That's just, I mean, I'm not going to bet on that, but that does seem to be what we're starting to see a little bit.
Awesome. Woof, man, the questions are flowing in. Okay.
Oh, geez.
It's like a whole exponential growth here.
That must mean I said something outrageous.
No,
not even knowing it.
Are there any mammal monitoring programs going on in the forest?
Yeah, this is one of the critiques of LTR as a network historically has been that we're not paying enough attention to the critters and to the way that the biological response to the changes that we're seeing. And we have all these different mammals, and we have not historically been all that great at paying attention to them. Ornithology, birds are probably the exception. But in recent years, we have added some researchers who are doing unbelievable work with small mammals, with spotted skunks and weasels, and this is really a kind of up and coming part of our program that we're super excited about.
That's awesome. Let's see. Someone's asked, there's a lot of decomposing log questions here, so try to arrange them. What was this species you studied for that study? What?
All different kinds of species. And that's how we know that they decompose at really different rates. So, all the species we have, we're paying attention to.
You want to list a few? We'll just throw out some names.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we have Douglas fir and western red cedars and hemlocks, and Pacific yew, and yeah, those are some examples.
Which one is do you think is going to be the longest decomposition, that 800 year?
I think we think it's the western red cedar. I think that was the one. I tried to email Mark today to tell me which one he thought was the 800-year one, because I had the 800-year number, but I'm like, what species was that? I think it was the western red cedar, if I'm not mistaken.
Cool. Let's see. How does the Andrews Forest fare with lightning strikes and forest fires?
Well, it depends on if you think lightning strikes are groovy or not, right? If we're high, we got big trees, and we get hit by lightning. So far, we haven't had a big fire. We've had fires nearby. There's actually a fire lookout at the Andrews Forest, this sort of 100-year-old building where somebody spends part of their summer paying attention to fire. That person also happens to be an amazing photographer, so we get a bonus there. But we have not yet seen, and it's really just a matter of time before we see fire hit our system in some way, and it'll be, we won't know where, so it's not like we'll be able to set up a pre and post study. But it will happen, and we'll pay attention and we'll learn something from it.
Here's a philosopher's question.
Okay. Is that a question for a philosopher or by a philosopher?
Both. We're all philosophers. Yeah.
Okay. All right. We all love wisdom. Right.
Question for all of us. Given your description of the difference in cellular life volume between a live tree and a downed log, which is more valuable to the forest, a live tree or a downed one?
I'm not sure I could make a distinction between those. I think that, if you think importance is measured purely on the basis of living cells or numbers of species, then you have to answer the dead tree. But I don't want anybody to use that as a justification for turning all live trees into dead trees, because the live trees are really critical to the forest as well. And the trees that are, dead but still standing are really critical to the forest as well. So it's some semblance of all of those. I think the thing that's really important is to, we might not kind of remember this from our history, but the idea that wood that falls to the ground, that sits on the ground, the idea that that's important for a forest, that's a recent realization. And it's a realization that largely has to do with the work that we did at the Andrews Forest. We were obsessed with the idea that, if trees fall, if branches fall, we're supposed to clean them up somehow. And so the idea that, a good forest is a messy forest like that, that's a pretty new realization. I mean, that's what's so profound about it, is that the dead tree or the dead wood is important in the forest.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it seemed maybe just as obvious in retrospect, but this is how things happen in nature. So isn't it important?
Yeah, but we also thought we were superior to nature. So, but we did the same thing with streams, right? So, the idea, we used to criticize streams that had logs in them and had wood in them. And so we would take the wood out. And now, of course, we're obsessed with putting wood in. And so, we fluctuate sometimes. We're flexible. Maybe that's the word. So I think the philosopher answer is, it depends on what you mean by importance, and all of those. If you defined it one way or another way, all of those would actually be important.
Some Socratic questioning. Throw it back at him.
That's right. What do you think? What do you think?
Let's see here. Ooh, another question about trees from Simone, age 10. How did they cut down the big trees?
They
logged it?
They logged it. Yeah.
So
but it was,
how did they cut those down?
You mean literally how they cut them down, like chainsaws?
Yeah, I guess, is it sometimes you see the pictures of the two people standing on the big old saw? Yeah. Machine now, or is it chainsaws?
Yeah. No, there were chainsaws at that time, big, huge chainsaws, and the cutting down of the tree didn't seem to be the challenge. So we have one of our watersheds, which we call Watershed 1, was completely clear cut, and the challenge wasn't cutting down the trees. The challenge was, oh my God, what do we do with them once they're down? And so these things are unbelievably huge. And so how do you get them out? And so we actually had to bring in some equipment from Europe to try to figure out, and we had to kind of invent a way to clear this small watershed. So it took a long time. It took 4 years to clear this watershed, because it was all just an experiment in how you actually go about doing this. We didn't really know how we were going to do it. This was in the early 1960s that we clear cut Watershed 1.
Huh. Let's see here. Doop. Are there any potential plans or desires to do a predator-prey study in the Andrews Forest in the future, hopefully with wolves?
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see if we have enough of a prey base with our small mammals, and if we don't have a lot of larger mammals because of the what's going on in the, because of the nature of the forest. It'll be interesting to see what wolves think of our forest. Will they pass through? Will they live there? What will they actually do? And if we have fires and that creates a different habitat, would that increase the prey base and therefore potentially increase the predator base? I think we're right now kind of in a wait and see mode with that. Not just with wolves, but predator prey studies in general. But wolves capture our imagination as well as they get closer and closer to the Andrews forest. It'll be interesting to see what goes on. We might have to headquarter a predator prey study at the Andrews forest and study other places in the national forest.
Is there an apex predator in the Andrews forest?
I mean, they're bears.
What? Oh, okay.
And they're cougars as well. So yeah, there are some, and it'll be interesting to see what, when apex predators come into contact with one another, they have interesting relationships as well at times. So it'd be interesting to see how that dynamic changes.
How many spotted owls live in the forest?
Not many. When I started about 8 years ago, and I remember being told by the owl crew that there were, I think it was either 11 or 13 spotted owls in the forest. And the last time I talked to one of the people in the owl crew, it was really just a few that remained in the forest. So, we're seeing what everybody else is seeing, this sort of decline in abundance of spotted owls. So we have them, but we don't have very many of them, and they seem to be on their way out.
What a bummer.
Yeah, I'm glad we're not ending on that note.
We're not going to end on that note.
Okay, good.
Let's see here. Is climate change affecting the species? I have two climate change questions. So the first one is climate change affecting the species mix in the Andrews forest?
We have every reason to believe that we're experiencing climate change just like every other place is. But what's really interesting about our experience of climate change is that it's not as obvious. There are certain measures of climate change that we don't seem to be seeing in the older forests. It doesn't mean that something isn't happening, but we're not observing this in the same way. Now, if you compare some parts of our forest, the old forest, to the younger parts of our forest, they respond very differently to climate change. We do see more of the signal, it seems, in the younger forests. Now, if you think about climate is one of the drivers in our system, right? How, what the changes in climate are driving other responses. I mean, climate is such a foundational driver in a system that as it changes, it's inevitably going to sort of ripple out and impact our system. And it's not going to impact it all in the same way. And so what we do see is that, we have really complex terrain in the system, and we do see little pockets of stasis where we don't see a lot of change. We call these microclimates, microhabitats. And so some animals seem to be using the microhabitats more and changing their behaviors. And in fact, we just submitted our next NSF proposal, and one of the things that we're interested in is this exact question is, how are the relationships between species going to change as we see them, maybe, moving to microhabitats or different habitats and then interacting with one another as we're creating these novel ecosystems. So hopefully in 6 years, we'll have something that looks like an answer to that question.
Well, another climate change question is wondering, can logging and the fight against climate change work together in a mutual progress?
I think it really depends on what you mean by logging. If what we're trying to do is maximize carbon storage in our Pacific Northwest forest, then logging, in order to do that, logging would have to look a certain way. If you're not trying to do that, if that doesn't matter to us, then logging could look very different. So it really depends on what we want to do with our forests. In certain scenarios, there does seem to be some compatibility, and in other scenarios, no, there isn't compatibility. But I don't think we've answered the first part of that question. What is our role in the fight against climate change in the Pacific Northwest? What are we trying to do? I don't think it's clear what we're trying to do yet. So I don't know if we can answer that question until we get some clarity there.
How has Watershed 1 recovered in the last 60 years?
Watershed 1 is so interesting. So we have sets of paired watersheds. So what we did is we took these little watersheds that were at the same elevation, and we took 3 of them, and one of them we clear cut, one of them we left alone as a control, and one of them we partial cut and put some roads in. And then we paid attention to things like stream flow and sediment and things like that. And these watersheds react really differently still to things like floods or heavy rains or snowfall. So we still see the signature of these impacts over time. So Watershed 1, we tried to replant it in Douglas fir. That kind of worked in some places, kind of not in others. Alder came back in abundance. And now the alder forests are crumbling; they're falling apart. We had an experiment going on in Watershed 1 that had a huge eddy flux tower coming up out of the stream, and it absolutely got crushed in February of last year during the big wet snow event. And so I was working on an essay called something about something about the world coming apart in a forest that's coming apart. And you see this forest kind of coming apart in really phenomenal ways. It's an incredibly interesting place.
That's so cool. I want to go see all of this. Let's see. What role does the dusky shrew play in the ecosystem? They're so little and cute.
I was looking at our mammal list, and I was just like, I'm just going to pick some that are there, and then I'm going to pick one that's not. And I saw dusky shrew, and the reason I picked it is because I'm like, I don't even know what that is, actually. I really can't answer the question. The one thing I will say, though, is that there are some species that we actually think are incredible ecosystem engineers. That we don't really know very much about. I don't know if the dusky shrew is one of them, but I know things like spotted skunks are one of them, and it's partly because of their behavior, right? They might be out at night when we're not really paying attention, or we might not even really know how many there are. And so we don't, there's so much we don't know about the impacts of these animals on our system and how much they're engineering our system. I don't know if the dusky shrew is one of them or not, unfortunately. I knew I should have a dusky shrew expert, with me at the dining room table. I knew it.
You can use your phone a friend.
That's right.
Yeah, all the animals, all the elements of the forest are important. Shrew, you can just make something up. Wears overalls and does jumping jacks. Let's see. The Andrews Forest website is through OSU. Is research done specifically through OSU, or are other universities receiving funding for research there as well?
Yeah, historically, we have been it's been an OSU focused activity. If you look at the other sites, the other 28 LTR sites around the country, they're much more mixed. People are coming from all over the place. And I would say recently, we've always had people from other places come and work at the Andrews Forest. We're a partnership, so it's OSU researchers, it's U.S. Forest Service researchers who are right next door to us in Corvallis. And more, we're including researchers from other places. So University of Oregon, we have researchers from all over the world, really, and from University of Indiana, from Marquette University. So more and more, we're recruiting people to come. People bring their classes. There's a class from the University of Wisconsin Whitewater that comes every year. So people come from all over to do work and to visit the forest, and we welcome that. We like the idea that people from other places come and work in the forest.
Yeah, especially since it's so special. Let's see. This one is, I think, a follow-up to your answer for one of the previous questions. But given the chance, what sort of involvement would you invite from Indigenous communities?
You know, I think of the work that we do at the Andrews Forest more and more because of the breadth and the disciplines that we have, is we are co-creating knowledge in ways that we haven't done before. That the interactions between scientists and artists are creating something that is a little different than what we've seen before. And the first thing that comes to mind is that, you know, this is another form of co-creation of knowledge. The invitation that I would issue as an invitation as partners and equals in this co-creation of knowledge. There's, you know, I think there's remarkable similarity between what we're committed to in long-term ecological research and this idea of traditional ecological knowledge. You know, we are in a place, and we are there for a long period of time, and that's one of the cornerstones of traditional ecological knowledge, that it's place-based and it's long-term, and that ultimately it's about telling stories. And Indigenous communities are wonderful at telling stories of their places. And we could learn a lot from how it is that you tell stories about your places. So, you know, I think of co-creation, and I think of partnership in this effort as the obvious role. Yeah.
And especially like the tribes that are traditionally from that region and accessing their ancestral knowledge, like even
Absolutely.
more.
Absolutely.
Okay. Back to mammals. Are you ready?
Okay.
Are there beavers in the forest?
Yes.
And so are they being studied?
I don't think anybody's doing any beaver work right now that I'm aware of. But you know, I showed you that slide that talks about 100 different projects, and I turned 54 yesterday, so I can't remember 100 different things. So there could be, but I don't think there's beaver work right in the forest.
I wonder if I always mix this up, and it makes me maybe a villain. Is OSU the ones that are beavers?
Yes. So you would think we would be obligated to have a beaver study.
Yeah, I think that might be the origin of that question.
Okay.
Let's see. Who was H.J. Andrews?
So he was a regional forester, and he mapped out the Andrews Forest. And I can't remember how old he was, but he was called back to work for the Forest Service in Washington, D.C. And shortly after he was called back, he died in a car accident. And so it's, you know, there are many experimental forests all over the country. And the practice is we don't name them after people, they're named after places. And so originally it was the Blue River Experimental Forest. But Hoss and Andrews was so well thought of by the Forest Service that in honor of him, they named the experimental forest after him.
Nice. Okay, looks like we got time for one more question. You ready for your
All right. I'm ready.
You've been a trooper. There's been a lot of questions.
You all have been troopers for putting up with the silly, goofy delay. Comcast.
Oh yeah, don't worry. I told a million jokes and entertained while you were
all right. Nice.
I was really witty and improvisational and on it. Okay, let's see. How easy is it to transfer the knowledge of the experimental forest to privately owned forests, knowing that it'll be difficult to convince private timber owners to implement conservation measures?
You know, people are weird. And
Science fact.
Yeah, science fact. We're not uniform in our responses to things, and so I think you know, there are lots of different kinds of private timber owners. If we're talking about sort of large corporate timber owners, that would be, you know, what the information that would be conveyed would be of one type, and it would be received in a certain way, perhaps. But there are many other kinds of private timber owners who I think would be eager and interested in the work that we do, and we learn things from it. And there could be corporate timber owners that are interested in those things as well. So I think it partly depends on what it is that those timber owners value. What do they think a forest is in the first place, and what do they value in the forest? And so some of the things that we've discovered are not going to be of interest to people, are in fact, I think, going to be threatening to some people, and other kinds of information are going to be welcomed and appreciated by various kinds of people.
Cool. Thank you so much for all of your insights and all of the work you're doing. This is incredibly exciting. That is all of our time for tonight. So wonderful. Thanks, Dr. Nelson. We're going to put your contact information so people can follow up and engage more with your work and with the Andrews Forest.
All right. Thank you.
So to everybody at home, hey folks, it's a bummer. We're out of time. I hope you all enjoyed tonight's event. And if you would like to watch this video again, or if you want to share it with your friends, and maybe you can tell them to start at the whatever minute mark, you can check out the videos section on OMSI's Facebook page or on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for updates on future events and more inspiring content from OMSI. And I know I mentioned at the beginning and also a little bit in the middle, but please consider supporting Science Pub and making a donation via the Facebook donate button, or you can visit omsi.edu/donate. Join us for our next Science Pub. It's going to be next week on Tuesday, June 23rd. And we're going to have a lecture by 3 different professors from the College of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Science at OSU. And they are going to introduce us to the nature of tipping points and illustrate a number of core examples of large and abrupt changes in our environment and the subsequent impacts on ecosystem and human communities. That's going to be really cool. So thanks again to our partner SolarStream for helping to make tonight's event possible. And as always, you can get more information on our website at omsi.edu. Thank you all and have a wonderful night.